Sheilagh Foster of McBride, BC, has just released her first book entitled Everett Monroe, The Legend and the Life.
The book documents the life of her father, Everett Alton Monroe, who was born in 1917 on his parents' Mountainview homestead in McBride.
Sheilagh was in studio earlier this week with reporter Andru McCracken discussing her father's life.
I always think of my dad as his transition from child to man parallels the development of this valley, really from wilderness to encroachment and settlement. Him as a learner, from a learner to a leader, from being filled with wonder to having some wisdom. To me, he really personifies my home and his home, this valley. He was an impatient man, intent on action. My original title for the book was Lead, Follow, or Get Out of the Way. And that was really Everett Monroe. He used the expression with his kids, and I suspect with other people as well. But it was very much this man. And sort of perhaps a key story in the book is how he exemplified this. He was a conscientious objector, and perhaps the cornerstone story in the book is his decision when, against what he was told or what his troop was told, he was being sent overseas, and he refused to do that. So as the troop train carrying the troops through this valley, as it slowed down to look at Mount Robson, the glorious Mount Robson, as it rounded the big rock bluff, and it slowed down and allowed the men to have a look. The door was open, and my dad turned to one of his mates and said, I think his words were, "I have a notion that I'm going to jump." And the guy said, "Well, go to it," and so he did. He jumped off the moving train, and he charged down over the edge. He had this idea he was going to swim the Fraser. He's basically a non-swimmer, so this was a big decision. The Fraser River at that time, this is in July, was huge and swollen. But he went down and he found some fence posts and wire, and he built himself a little raft, just a personal raft that could encircle him, and he launched himself into the Fraser. But then, of course, the military police were backtracking to look for him, and at one point he heard some shots. He felt that he couldn't be seen, but he felt that he was probably heard, and that the shots were warning that, yes, they'd heard something. So he followed the bank of the Fraser to the railway that was going towards McBride. He came to some folks in Tijon. I think their name was Gladish. They suggested that he could just go down and walk across the bridge. And that they knew that there was a taxi driver that sometimes went into McBride. By this time, the RCMP had alerted his parents that Everett had jumped the train.
Wow. And
they could find no trace of him, and I gather my mother was really very upset. But my grandfather said, "Oh, he's a good woodsman. I have a feeling he'll be okay." And of course, then they were delighted when he came in. But that started a long process that is a good chapter in the book of his attempts to avoid, or he did avoid, the military police as they looked for him.
As his daughter, what do you think, what was going through his mind? Is it very clear to you why he was a conscientious objector, and did he talk to you about that?
He didn't talk to me about it, Andrew, and indeed that's the very reason that I wrote the book. My dad never talked about it. He never talked about it other than we got a sense of his feelings about war. He never talked about that, nor did my mother. I wrote the book because when my aunt died, Sadie Fry, she left a big pile of, it was papers and photographs and everything. But eventually I found this old box that had been tied together, and when I went into it, it was very obviously all the documentation about my dad's involvement as a conscientious objector, the letters they'd written on his behalf and different documents. And so I mean, I had known as a child that he had done this, but he never talked about it. And so I wanted to get a sense of what he was feeling. Why did he take such a strong position? And that really is the basis for this book. Is where it came from.
Wow.
Yeah. He was never deployed overseas because he jumped the troop train.
Yeah.
By the time he was caught and imprisoned for it for, I think, about 3 months, he got an honorable discharge from that, which is kind of a really neat story. The honorable part of the discharge, when he was anything but an enthusiastic soldier. He just was not.
Wow. Wow. Extraordinary. Wow. Do you think that in this tale there's a lesson for us today? Hey, we're in Afghanistan. We're at war.
Indeed. You know, part of my delight in writing this, I have to confess, as a child, I knew my dad's position, but I also was a child in the school system that every year had these ceremonies, you know, for Remembrance Day.
Sure.
And I used to sit very quietly because my dad's cousin, Stanley Monroe, was the only soldier from the, I'm not sure the Robson Valley, certainly from McBride, who was killed in the Second World War.
I see.
So he had a cousin who was killed, and I often sat there as a student in class thinking, was my dad as brave as his cousin? You know, he wouldn't go and do this. And so I think I probably had this residual worry that he was not as upright as other men who went off to war. So it's with particular delight, really, that I've come to a realization, an appreciation, and really a hero worship of this dad of mine who took such a stand at such terrible personal consequence, and he was willing to accept the consequences. He was truly, in my mind, a very moral man who knew what he was doing and knew that it was an act of civil disobedience. But I think he felt strongly that in a society that claims to be just, or almost just society, he was not given a just ability to make decisions. He was not treated justly. And I think that maybe is the lesson to us, that, you know, when we have civil disobedience and conscientious objectors, they are making a strong statement that some of the policies of our decision makers may not be that just.
Wow.
The book is on sale at Infinity Office and Health. Proceeds from the sale go to the Valemount Historic Society.